And we are live at our regular time. Everything is going according to plan. We're only down one person who's happily watching the Avengers Endgame.
Yeah,
So
I have to. I don't know. I may have to watch that. There's a lot of people posting like it made every Marvel movie worth it, and I'm like, last few drug. Yeah, I don't know. The last few superhero movies I've watched, I've just been like, I'm kind of over the superhero movie thing. I think at this point, but mostly no. I think actually what happens with them is much like the problem I had with like the X-Men movies. When it becomes how many freaking characters can we cram into a movie and not give any of them any development time?
You mean Suicide Squad?
Yeah.
That was the worst example. I think that Marvel is willing to at least do a little bit of character development because they know that they're going to have so many movies to go. You know, they can actually put a bit of an arc in.
Well, yeah, but the best of those are always like, the origin story ones. It always felt like everyone after the first one introducing that character was kind of substandard compared.
I mean, you got to think like as a writer, it's got to be kind of tough to build beyond an origin story. Like origin stories, you just kind of get like free range. You can do what you want. Mm-hmm. So,
I think it was. I agreed with God. I cannot remember who said this. It might have been Brandon Sanderson, but I'm not sure. But they said their biggest problem with superhero movies is the heroes always fight villains with like powers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, yeah. I think like Doctor Strange, like it's like both of them are basically wielding the same sort of like it's
that's what it's
like
it's
mirror images.
Or Iron Man's fighting a guy in a power suit.
Yeah, they always do end up fighting themselves, basically.
Yeah, I think it was Brandon Sanderson because when he wrote his superhero books, like people with different powers had to face off against each other and like figure out how to overcome that.
Spider-Man fights Doc Ock, the 8-legged insect fighting the the arthropod.
Yeah.
Am I right there? Andy, biology guy?
Yeah. Well, and I think, though, in some ways, Spider-Man had some differences other than, like, Venom, of course. Like, this...
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but,
Venom was... I did an unsolicited review of that one, man. That was something else. That was really something else.
It was still a better portrayal of Venom than the Venom in Spider-Man 3, though. Oh my god,
that
movie was awful. Don't. It was bad. So bad.
Yeah, I stayed away. I don't think I'd stayed away intentionally. Was that the one that had the Sandman in it too?
Yeah, it was not good.
Okay.
They tried to jam way too much into one movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
Speaking of.
That's
Avengers.
That's like every X-Men movie, though. It's like, how many things can we cram into this one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was certainly what that last X-Men movie, that X-Men 3. They tried to do way too much. God. I don't know, like spreading it over multiple movies is almost. I mean, when you think about it, when it gets done, you've almost got like the single biggest like season of a Netflix series ever. That's like $1 billion has been spent over like 8 to 12. Or I probably am vastly underestimating just how many movies are in the MCU, but
20 to 12, like 24.
Okay.
Yeah,
somewhere in that range.
Yeah, it's a long one. I don't know. I've gotten slightly burned out. The only one I do actually want to see a little bit more is Captain Marvel, because I haven't watched that yet, and my wife actually kind of wants to watch that one. So
yeah, I haven't seen that one either. I'd like to check that one out. Well, fellas, TC, by the way, is not joining us tonight. Instead, he's currently getting to see on the opening night Endgame, which is pretty ridiculous. I know that we had a tennis meet get rescheduled for tomorrow, and that resulted in one of our tennis players, unfortunately, losing like $60 that he'd invested in tickets for himself and several other people that hadn't yet paid him. And he's like, "Oh no, these tickets!" and that's the way it went. You weren't seeing Avengers Endgame unless you've got it reserved. So apparently TC's family had done that for him. So enjoy the movie, TC, and we'll be thinking about you. And don't spoil it for us.
Spoil it. I hate anti-spoiler culture. Spoil it. Come on, tell us everything. Tell the live audience, just totally. Tell it how it ended. Everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have him do that on the next episode. So
Jon Snow dies at the end of Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think anybody who's seen Game of Thrones is really all too worried about deaths anymore. So.
Oh, that's right. He already died.
Which Stark is most likely to die this weekend?
Yeah.
Sansa, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this new season of Game of Thrones. They're making it up for season 7. We're talking about tonight. These analog and digital and everything. So I guess that's kind of, to a certain extent, we're talking about the big blockbuster, visual candy, eye candy stuff. This is the digital world that we're talking about, and what's busy happening in the analog world of novels and books. Nobody's got time for that. Okay, ain't nobody got time for that. All right.
Yeah, that's why HBO is writing George R.R. Martin's book for him.
Yeah, it'll get done that way. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games, and sometimes also movies, and sometimes also video games, and sometimes even books.
And whatever I derail the conversation with.
Yeah, and sometimes just whatever Andy has on his mind. That's right. Andy's help session, two friends counsel Andy Dennison for an hour and change here on this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.
Just so you all know out in the wide world, while it might sound like I'm doing this on purpose, this is actually my normal conversation style.
He's not lying there. That's Andy Dennison joining me, Joe Sallin, as well as Trent Ham. Trent, how are you doing tonight?
Great, let's do this.
We got it. We're going to be reviewing board games first, then we move on to our topic, the analog gaming versus digital gaming, and what we think is best in each of those, and what is each of those formats is best suited for. Finally, we hype games on our way out the door. Before we get it all started, check out GameSurplus.com for your online board game purchases. That's right, GameSurplus.com has a huge selection of board games, and you can find competitive pricing as well as discounts on the podcast pick section, which I have recently sent in an extensive list of games to be on that podcast pick section. So go check it out. Get our code from the transitions when it comes up. And anyway, check them out, GameSurplus.com.
Oh, to add to GameSurplus.com, I just saw earlier today. He's got an expansions to Time of Crisis. So he's got the Age of Iron and Rust just came in. And if you like Time of Crisis, I haven't even played it yet, and I consider it a must-have expansion that will always be played with the base game.
Gotcha.
Good to know your insightful review there, Andy.
Yep, that's very good. And you can have bots when none of your group will play it because it's a 3-hour war game.
Yeah, it looks like it's just become available there. So get it right now before it's hot there. I'm clicking on it now to see. It appears to still be in stock. Yes, it is. You can still get it. So check that out. The Age of Iron and Rust. All right. Well, let's get our reviews now going, and we shall start with a classic game that I'm sure you've heard tell of prior on this podcast, but now Andy's going to give us a new perspective on it.
Oh, yeah. So
modern classic.
Oh, modern classic. I was like, what? But before I get to that, though, I'm going to give just a brief shout out to Travis Hill of Lower Player Count. His game Penny Rails that I hyped an episode or so ago just came out on Button Shy. And I just saw the guy who runs Button Shy posted that Penny Rails has had the best first day sales of any wallet game they've done to date. So just a congratulations to Travis.
Congrats, Travis.
It's great to see good things happen to good people. It slightly restores my faith in the universe. So anyway, but what I'm actually going to review is Azul. So yeah, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you already know this game. But anyway, I've played it off and on in game nights. It's kind of a filler game, which it kind of fits more into that category for me. But I basically was out Easter shopping for my kids, and I noticed that Target had it in stock. So basically I was like, you know what, I think my son's been getting into kind of some deeper games and stuff now, kind of moving, into the world of regular Ticket to Ride, maybe ready to pass that to a little more difficult style. And my wife really likes pattern games and more in the abstract world. So I picked it up to play on Easter as kind of an Easter present for the family. And so we busted that out on Easter, immediately played like 2 or 3 games of it that day. And so that was last Sunday. And literally every day I've picked up my son, he's asked if we could play Azul again. And other than tonight, just because of some time crunch issues, we have literally played it every night since Easter. And he's 10. He's a pretty bright kid too, but it's really great for me to watch him because he's sitting there just like, even on the first game, he was sitting there like calculating out like what move gets him the most points and starting to form basic strategies. So that's kind of the advantage of Azul, is that it for me as a heavier gamer, it kind of acts as a nice filler game. But it's also a really great gateway game. So in Azul, you basically have like so many circles that have tiles. There's 4 tiles on each one. And then the mechanism is you take all of one kind of tile and you move the rest into the center. And then after that, each player can take all of one kind of tile from another circle or the center and so on. And you kind of put them in these rows from one tile, then 2, then 3, then 4, and 5. And then at the end of all of this tile collection, what you do is any row that's completed, you slide that tile over, you score points. You get 1 point if the tile's just kind of sitting there on its own, or you get more points if the more orthogonally adjacent tiles there are. There's also end game points if you get all of one kind of tile on the map by the end of the game, or if you have completed columns or completed rows. It's a very basic game in terms of the mechanics and what you're doing. But the thing that I really like about Azul is, as a kind of lighter gateway game, there's still really interesting choices to make. There's strategies to it. Do I want to go with this? Do I want to go with that? If I take these tiles, what is that giving to my opponent? If I don't take them in this order, am I going to get skunked later on? Because that happened to me a couple nights ago as I was just kind of playing fast and loose and not really looking that far ahead. And then I finally did, when you're taking those last sets of tiles from the middle, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to take 4 tiles that I can't put into a column anywhere. Yep, there's -7 points right there. So there's just a lot of interesting decisions for a pretty light gateway game. Then the components are, Azul's kind of the poster child for the first using of those nice little resin or plasticky tiles they have in that it seems like everybody's trying to do now. And it's a really beautiful game. It's thinky enough to be interesting to heavier gamers. But still light enough you can play easily with a family. Like I said, the rules teach 10 minutes or less. And then you can jump right in. You'll pick it up, in one round or two. You'll kind of see what things are doing. And like I said, there's some good, interesting decisions to be made, some strategies to exploit, and things to try from game to game. And if you ever get to the point where it's feeling a little bit too scripted to you, you can flip the board over, and instead of having this set way the tiles can go out, you can choose how you put them out, and you can end up doing horrible things to yourself by doing that. So anyway, so that's Azul. Like I said, for me, not really, a heavyweight game, but when I'm going to play games with my family or maybe people who haven't played a lot of games before in the hobby market, this is the kind of game I'm going to reach for, that has a little bit more interesting decisions and that's really going to capture people's interest. Because like I said, my son, every day he's asked to play Azul. This morning we didn't have time, but he even asked if we could play Azul before he went to school, like, over iPad time and anything. So, yeah. So I really dig this game. It's a light game as a gateway game. This is the kind of thing I want to have in my collection for that purpose.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I have a lot of success with this one. It's easy to get games played. It's very quick. Like you said, a filler game. I also consider this a filler game. So we do agree on that categorization. Trent, do you have anything to add?
It's been a similar hit here. It was a huge hit about a year ago. We played it a ton for a while. We've actually played a lot of the Azul sequel that looks a lot like Sagrada. Stained Glass of Sintra. I think your son will also enjoy that if he enjoyed this one.
Yeah, this one's still new enough. I'm not worried about it, but I'm looking at it down the road probably. Actually, the one I'm thinking about bringing out with him next is, if he liked this one, is that Dragon Castle, the one that's kind of got the Mahjong mechanic. Yeah, that should be interesting too.
And then after that, 18CZ.
Yeah. Then it's like, what train games? Is he ready for Chicago Express or Paris Connection? And then eventually his mom will be forced to play 18OE with us.
Yeah.
No, so that is never going to happen. I'm just
probably not. No.
That'll be dad and son setting it up in the basement at best.
Yeah, that's the most you can hope for.
Yeah.
Well, Trent, I'm interested to hear which of the games by the title you've placed in our notes you're actually going to review, because what I'm seeing here, none of these seem to me like they would be up your alley. But anyway, I'll let you take it from here, assuming you're not going to play a roll-and move.
No, it's not a roll-and move. No. I'm talking about Orchard, which is the 2018 Print and Play Golden Geek Award.
Okay.
It's designed by Mark Tuck, and it's a print and play, but it only requires 9 cards and a handful of dice in 3 different colors. That's all you need, is a few 6-sided dice in 3 different colors, and the ability to basically print off 1 sheet of 9 cards, and that's all you need. In this game, you basically take those 9 cards, shuffle them up, turn one of them face up on the table, draw the next 2 that are in your hand, because this is a solo game, just to be clear, and then you're off to the races. What you do in this game is, the cards depict 6 flowers on them on a 3x2 grid. The flowers are one of 3 different colors. They're either purple, red, or yellow. Each card is unique in terms of how the flowers are arranged. They're a different arrangement on each card. You take one of the 2 cards in your hand and you play it on the layout of cards already in front of you. So at the start again, there's only 1. And you just must leave this to overlap the card that's already in front of you, or the cards. It must overlap at least 1 card that's already been played to the table by at least 1 flower. You can overlap multiple flowers if you want. In fact, you probably should. By overlapping, I mean that they've got to match colors. So if you are laying 2 of the flowers overlap, they both got to match colors. Twice during the game, you can use a little black cube to cheat and not have to match colors in your overlap, but then that's a -3 points at the end of the game. So when you lay down a card and it overlaps, if there's no dice on on the overlapping flowers, you place a dice on them with value of 1. If you're overlapping flowers that already have a dice on them, if it's a 1, you turn it to a 3, and if it's a 3, you turn it to a 6. If it's a 6, you don't get anything else. At the end of the game, you just add up the total of all the dice on the field, and that's your score. And every time you play, you're trying to beat your best score. And that's literally all the game is. You can rotate the cards freely as you want. And I was curious. I usually try to print off the Print and Play board game award winners because I'm curious. And this is like a 9-card game, and there's a solitaire game, and it seemed like it'd be quick to play. The first couple times I played it, I was like, this is really simple. I'm not really interested in it. But the very last time I played it, it kind of clicked what's going on here. It feels like you're just looking at a card and trying to place it on the spot that would get you the most points. But if you do that, your score is never going to be very high. The way to get your score really high is to think about both of the cards that you have. And then that's the next layer, as you're looking at how to combo the two cards that you have. Then, as you peel back the next layer of the onion, you realize what you're really thinking about is coming up with a board state that has a high number of dice near the edge that you can easily like turn a 3 to a 6. So later on, you're trying to figure out how do I keep all my dice to the edge rather than the middle? Because if they're in the middle and they're surrounded by other flowers, it's very hard to keep adding those dice up. So you're kind of in a way trying to plan ahead for what's in your deck without really knowing what's in your deck. And since you're doing that all spatially and rotating the cards, it turns out a really good little spatial puzzle. And that's really what this game is. It's a spatial puzzle in a box. Like I said, it's literally 9 cards. And you need 15 dice, 3 of each, or 5 dice of 3 different colors each, and 2 little black markers, and that's all you need to play it. So it doesn't take it that much. I keep it in a little hip size, like a deck of card size box, because I have miniature dice with it. And I've been pulling it out a lot more than I ever expected I would. I keep pulling it out and playing it. It's really fun. It only takes like 5 or 10 minutes. Unless you sit there and AP, which you can at this, surprisingly. I'm surprised how much you can AP, especially when you start really thinking about the optimal move, which often isn't the one that gets you the most points on that turn. That's often not the best move, except for maybe late in the game. And just there's a lot going on here. They did make a great Game Crafters version of it, so like you could go to the Game Crafters and get it printed off, and they would send it to you for like $15. But that got shut off because they're apparently going to do a Kickstarter run of it because they were selling so many of them. And so I think it's going to be on Kickstarter in the like $15-ish range. And if you're looking for a nice little solitaire 5 to 10 minute game that really, really hits the feeling of like spatial geometry and card rotation, trying to figure out how patterns match up, highly recommend this one. It's really good. It was better than I was expecting. And that's Orchard. It was designed by Mark Tuck, and it won the 2018 Board Game Geek Print and Play of the Year award. And like I said, given what it is, remember, it's a 5 to 10 minute solitaire game. It's really, really good. I'm very impressed. And it's Orchard.
This is my kind of solitaire game when it comes down to it. Like, this is the type of game where, like you described, a puzzly little game that plays in like 5-10 minutes. One where, you know, I get a rule wrong and I'm not that worried about it. I play it again. It really does to me seem like one I'd be interested in. I'd like to see this get a wider release. It sounds like it's at the Game Crafter right now.
Yeah, it is, but they just turned it off recently because they're going to do a Kickstarter. It was on Game Crafter up until like a week or 2 ago, but apparently they're going to do a large Kickstarter run, so they turned off the Game Crafter for now. So you have to wait for the Kickstarter or else make your own.
Okay.
But making your own, like I said, if you've got 3 different colors of 6-sided dice laying around your house and you can print off 1 sheet of cardstock, you're good to go.
Well, when that hits Kickstarter, Trent, try to shout that out, not just to me, but also to people listening to this show, because they might be interested in that as well.
Well, it's very good. And like I said, it fits right in your hip pocket. It's the size of like a deck of playing cards if you're not using giant dice, and you wouldn't, because it really wouldn't be functional with a game. It'll fit in like a size of a deck of cards box.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right. Well, that was Orchard, and you got it's got like a subtitle as well, a 9-card solitaire game, and that you'll be able to find it that way on Board Game Geek. Not the 1986 seemingly roll and move game with large resin or wood fruits and things, but
no, definitely not.
Not that one. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and round out our reviews with a kind of a simple review for me to give, because the game that I'm reviewing is essentially a mashup of 2 existing games. And I believe it was reviewed by you, Trent, earlier, but now that I've had some time to play it more, I'm pretty much going to confirm my opinion. And I think earlier when I first played it, I don't think my opinion has changed much, but I'll at least reiterate. I'm talking about Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which combines the system format of Between Two Cities, and then sort of uses instead of tiles from the cities, you now play with tiles that are rooms in a castle. Now, you're still not going to be playing with all these different sizes of rooms like you did in Mad King Ludwig, where, you know, you end up sort of making this weird, you know, a castle that's full of circular rooms that butt right up to, you know, square and rectangular rooms. However, the building of your castle is free form, starting from a 2x1 tile that's like a center room that just has a really simple recipe on it, that's going to be different for each city. And after you get going, though, all the tiles that you're going to be placing down are of the same flavor as the different styles of rooms in the castles of Mad King Ludwig. Like Between Two Cities, you are going to be playing where you've got a city on your left, city on your right, and your final score is the lower of those two. So you're trying to cooperate with people, because they are sharing those cities as well. You know, that's how this system works. It's how you do drafting in a way that sort of takes the hate out of these drafting games, but does so in a very savvy way. I find this to be my sort of intro level. Between Two Cities is what I love to teach people, to teach them the system of drafting. Either this, if they would like city building type games, or meaning Between Two Cities, or I would use Sushi Go for, you know, just straight basic drafting. Anyway, Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig is, I think that it just kind of pushes the game outside of, whereas Between Two Cities, you can sort of look at somebody's city from across the table, and all the information is very concise. There's not very many things to have to see. If you add in the expansion, there is unique tiles that have different types of scoring that you wouldn't necessarily just be able to immediately recognize from, like I said, sitting across the table. What I think Between Two Castles does is it makes it so almost every room in the game is like that. Almost every room in the game that scores is going to score based on a specific type of room being next to it. That means that when your game starts, it's fairly aimless, but as you get going, you are not only trying to get specific room types because your previously placed rooms are trying to score off of those symbols or room types, but you're also trying to get 3 of a kind, because once you get 3 of a kind, you get a special effect. Much like when you finished off the doors in Mad King Ludwig. So you take that pretty much, I don't know, it really is like they just took these 2 things and then just put them through a meat grinder, and what comes out, you know, then they slap that on the grill and it was just fine. You know, it's like that sort of, I would compare it to like a pork brat burger, meaning that it's a hamburger. Right, and I love these food references. I love to give food references that probably make no sense, but it's like it has the flavor of a brat, and so, you know, you're gonna enjoy it if you like a brat. But if you don't like the way to have to eat a brat, and you'd rather eat it like a sandwich, like that's your brat burger. And I feel kind of like that's, you know, if you want to play your Castles of Mad King Ludwig, but you want it to fit between a much easier bun, this is the game for you. Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, where instead of it just being, you know, 1 piece of bread, now you have 2. And it's really like, if you like both of those games, you'll probably like this game if the idea of those 2 together sounds good. If you didn't like either of those games, well, if you didn't like Castles of Mad King Ludwig because of the Master Builder, there is no Master Builder here. It replaces that entirely. There's nothing like it. So there's no ability for one player to accidentally make a super, super, super awesome deal for another player because they overthought, you know, because they didn't think about something. It just passed their mind. If you didn't like Between Two Cities because you thought that it was just too simple, well, first buy the expansion to Between Two Cities. But next, maybe you'll appreciate this game because it does. If you liked what the expansion did to Between Two Cities, it's almost like that's the entire game of Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. I think the game is really well made. I think that it works well. It's got a weird like insert where it has slots for exactly 9 tiles, so you can like shuffle everything up and then put them into stacks and just get them out. I would have preferred just a giant bag like Race for the Galaxy or something. I don't know. I know that it just seems weird because what ends up happening every time we play it is that we don't shuffle the game when we put it away, and then when we get it out, we don't remember not having shuffled it, so we just pretend like we've shuffled. Everybody looks at their tiles and they're like, I've got a hand of all the same stuff. But anyway, it's just a weird like game trays insert where they just, I guess, had the extra money to spend on that. Still, I'm going to say that Between Two Castles and Mad King Ludwig is a fine game. and one that deserves your attention if you've played either of those games, or if it's your first game for the series. I think it'll be a very easy way to get into it. So that's what I have to say about it. You guys have anything to add?
Yeah, like based on your review, I now have like our next topic idea. We're going to look at the top 10 BGG games and describe them through foods you can only buy at the Iowa State Fair.
Yeah. This is the deep fried butter. Deep fried Oreos.
Yeah. Yeah, the fried Twinkie's a little better. That's kind of like your Mage Night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The fried Twinkie is Mage Night, Andy. Really? Like, I think Mage Night deserves much more. Maybe Mage Night is the best of the Iowa wines. Wow, that's still an insult, though.
Yeah,
I don't know. We get and I don't want to insult Iowa wines. I'm from Iowa. I like them. I have them all. And they're just not there where the other ones are, though.
No,
they're good. They're fine.
That's all right. Give it a few more years. Climate change will get it right.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're gonna be the place to be then. Yeah, Iowa, the California of the apocalypse. All right, so all right, we're now on to, so we've discussed a few analog games, and I mean, so understand that when we discuss analog games and we try to compare them to digital games, and when I say digital games, I don't mean just like their digital counterparts. I mean, there are some games that are kind of like analog games that first existed in a digital sense. But when introducing our topic here, I'd like to be clear that we're talking about, when you discuss a game, like a proposed game, would that work best in for a sort of tabletop setting, or would it work best in a video game format, where you've got a controller with that sort of input? Like in easy input. And, like when it comes down to it, I would say that there's a lot of different directions we can take here, but I think that we were more focused, at least in my planning for this, my preparation for this episode, I was considering that, more of like we did in our last episode with games that exist only in our minds. Like, what about games that exist, what if we use our minds to try to imagine, if games would be best suited in what we are looking for from video games versus what we're looking for from analog games? And in too many words, basically, what are we looking for from board games? What are we looking for from video games? And how are those things, maybe where do they intertwine? And where do we find examples where we feel that maybe a game would have shined much more in the opposite format? So is that kind of what you guys were thinking when we were considering this topic? Is that what you're thinking, Andy?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, because I kind of threw out this idea earlier because I'd been listening to Punching Cardboard podcast, and they kind of like as a tangent got into this a little bit. So like it really got me thinking, because before I just would have said, oh, sure, yeah, you can, anything is good in either form. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I think there are things that, do work better in one sense or another. And so like, let's bring out one that I think actually might be a little bit hard to classify. So let's think civilization games. Would that be better done through board game form, better done through video game form? Can you pull it off in both?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, because I'll be the first to say here, because I'm a huge fan of Through the Ages, right? And I guess I don't want to be cheating here and saying, because a lot of most of my plays of Through the Ages are like digital game, right?
But you're still playing the analog version of it. That's not quite the same thing.
It's an analog game in a digital format. So yeah, I guess this one's kind of cheating because I'm going to call that. Through the Ages, I consider, an analog game, and that is certainly like my sweet spot for civilization games in general. I think civilization games, it depends on what you're looking for. Like if you want something like, I remember playing Civ 3 for the first time, Sid Meier's Civilization 3, which is actually based originally on Francis Tresham's board game. So, I mean, you're talking like that game is originally coming from a digital form or a analog format, and then was designed as a digital counterpart to that, per se, where you could really kind of take what was abstracted in Francis Tresham's Civilization and then really be, more explicit with it. And that's where I think that, like, in terms of having just the entire kitchen sink approach, I think that the digital version works really well with Civilization. Whereas, like, where I think that, like, the base core strategies that you can approach in Civilization, and this is, I think, is pretty clear if you ever play Civilization, the board game, the Fantasy Flight version, which is like actually based on Sid Meier's game, is that you pretty much make a decision of like 1, 2, 3. I think there's like 3 or 4 different kind of victories, and you just pretty much go for that, right? Like that's what you're going for. And so all these other things that you can sort of add, you basically ignore everything that's not tailored towards the victory condition that you're really shooting for. You of course got to keep like playing whack-a-mole with different other game systems, but you really push at least your technology and what you're gearing your civilization towards is not, it's kind of decided for you at the start. And I think that for that reason, like, it works that you've got so many different frills to add to it. And I played so much Civ 3, I played so much Civ 4. And, since then, though, after finding that Through the Ages has like these huge twists and turns and your civilization feels like this hulking mass that, where there will be moments when the rug is pulled out from under you and you're just like, you just collapse on the ground like a dog on the kitchen floor, like it just can't like get its footing. And you were like, I was so strong. And then I wasn't ready for this. Whereas that sort of thing happens over the course of like 25 to 30 turns in Civilization, the online game, like the Sid Meier Civilization, especially now with like Civ 6, it feels like it takes a long time for those sort of changes to happen. And it's just because there's so much growing out. There's like an exploration phase. There's, exploitation and stuff. Like there's so many things that have to happen, and they have to happen in like this map setting. It's so micromanagement focused. Whereas like it's Through the Ages is almost entirely macro. It's all like clear back up here, and you're really seeing the sort of like, whereas in Civilization, the video game, you make the decisions both as the plant supervisor as well as like, the shift managers too. And Through the Ages, you're just that plant supervisor. And I found that like that to me, like making a civilization, carrying it from antiquity up to the point where it collapses, and I quit at the start of age 2 because that's how pathetic I am, or maybe go all the way to the end of age 3. If I'm somehow if I'm playing with people who haven't figured me out yet. I really just appreciate that view from Through the Ages, and it taps into, like what's core to me about loving analog games in general, which is when what the other players at the table are doing matter, and they don't just matter. They're like everything is centered around like these pillars of interaction that rest on each other. Yeah,
I can see that. Like, Trent, you have any thoughts on Civ games? Which kind of does it better?
Honestly, I think it depends on the kind what you're looking for in the game. In terms of simulating a civilization, I think the computer does it better. But I genuinely feel like the game that feels most like a Civ game to me is the very original one that computer games is based on, the old Francis Tresham one. Mm-hmm. I honestly really think that's the best Civ game out there. You give me a choice between having a day where I can play the Civ computer game, or play any other Civilization board game, or play the old Civ game by Francis Tresham from the 70s or early 80s, I'll take the Francis Tresham game any day of the week.
Yeah. I still haven't played that one. That'd be good to try sometime. Yeah, I think, I think I would agree somewhat with this. If what you want out of a Civ game is sort of that resource management building up of the Civilization game, I think, yeah, the video game's probably going to do it better, just because of the calculation values of all the resources. Like a computer can just handle that really well. Whereas if you're going to do that in board game form, you got to really remove a lot of that minutia. Otherwise, you're going to end up, if you want to play the Civ game equivalent of like Campaign for North Africa, maybe you could do what the computer's doing with it. It's like, oh, before I make my next move, I have to calculate my new wheat yield. Okay, what was the weather today? Oh, what was that? That kind of stuff. So I think if what you like is that micromanagement of finances and resources, probably the computer game. But if you want the feeling of that broad movement of civilization, then I don't think you see that in computer games a lot. Like, you don't generally see the high level as much. It almost always comes down to the micromanagement. The only game I know of computer-wise that really tried the high-level thing was Master of Orion 3, and that was a dismal failure. Oh my god, that game was awful. Because it got to the high-level thing where you could not play the game micromanaging it. You had to play at high level, and you had to set up all these weird programmed instructions of what your Civ would do given certain situations. But comparing that then to Master of Orion 2, which is very micromanagement focused, Master of Orion 2, oh god, I'd play that game hands down. I would still play that game, but Master of Orion 3 I tried to play several times with that macro view, and it was awful. Just bad.
Yeah. I think to illustrate that, Andy, I think probably the game that is most closely approximated what I enjoy about the micromanaging and all, like you said, the sort of zoomed in, trying to do zoomed in and zoomed out, the things that happen in Sid Meier's Civilization. I think the one that got the closest to that is Clash of Cultures.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
And my issue with that, though, is that, I think that I was comparing them so much in my mind that I just kept feeling like I really would rather play Civ, the video game, than I would play this because it feels like a very simplified, pared down version that still takes 3-4 hours to do.
Oh, yeah.
There's new systems that are there, but whereas I'm evolving units from this to this to this to this in Sid Meier's Civilization over the course of 120 turns, there's only is it 3 times 6 turns in Clash of Cultures, and so I only get 18 turns, and I'm only ever moving at most 5 units, and it just it felt like a very simplified version. I was playing Sid Meier's Civilization on the most small map with the smallest pool of units to choose from, and I was only playing it from turn 0 to turn 30. So I just
The one thing I think though about Civ games that's going to be better analog is a lot of Civilization games have some form of diplomacy system built in.
Yes. That's why I like the face-to-face.
Yeah, and the computer diplomacy systems are always, I would say, even the ones I've played that are good, they're kind of annoying at best.
Mm-hmm. Or they keep on offering you that same exact deal for trade routes or something every single turn.
Or for example, I was playing Total War Rome 2, right? And so this is a digital, and I had this one country completely surrounded by just unbelievable amounts of legions, and I'm like, you should become a client state. They're like, I refuse. I'm like, you just want to die? Seriously, there is no hope of you surviving if I come after you, and you're saying no. And then hilariously, I was doing the war end condition, and I had to capture all of Armenia, right? So I started invading this really big civilization, and took over 2 or 3 of his places, just snap of the fingers, right? And he had 10 settlements left and just surrendered, became my client state out of the blue, and I won the game in one turn. It's gonna take 20 to do it. So the one guy wouldn't surrender, but you're like, you know what? Nah, I just don't have it. That's the kind of crazy crap you can get into the computer one. Or often I've seen computer ones cheat with diplomacy. So I think it was in one of the Galactic Civilization games, the way they kept up, the AI kept up with a player was they would just automatically trade each other whatever tech they were researching. And so, like, you know, one race, oh, I have the best shields for guns. I have the best shield for lasers. You know, there's no rational reason those two civilizations should work together, but they trade the techs because it makes it harder on the player. And so, like, they use the diplomacy system to cheat, you know, and it's like that's something that just I don't know of a way you can make that digital.
They're either terrible or they're frustratingly hard, right? It's like, I don't know. It just can't. You can't get the same thing from an opponent, as you mentioned, Trent. It's like the face-to-face aspects. Really, you know, bringing out the diplomacy aspects of Civ games takes having opponents either. I mean, you can get opponents, right, and you can get opponents that you know, and you can get them in a Discord chat or something, even if you can't be in the same place, you know, and do like a LAN party like the old days. But you can do that in a digital setting, but that's not what most of my experience is. And so I have a hard time being able to really see anything but what you were talking about, Andy, from these Civ games when I play them on in a digital setting.
Well, even if you were to do that, like, you're still limited by the interface of the game. Like, whereas I think in tabletop and definitely in role-playing games, there's just more freedom in how you can choose to manipulate that system. You know, like, we could agree to something that the digital game just doesn't allow us to do, you know? Because it wasn't programmed for it. So, yeah, I think anything that involves that negotiation aspect, that's just going to be better analog, period. I just don't know how you would make that digital and make it work decently. The other one, like, vice versa to that, wasn't there some apps where they tried to put, like, the social deduction games on digital? And, like, I don't see how that one would work.
I've seen my students play like Witch of Salem, which I believe is, I don't know if you'd call that a digital or an analog game, but it certainly is played in like the same sort of, you know, imagine something like Yahoo Pool, you know, except you've got like a table full of 10 people. And the thing that I noticed, you know, is it was always like kids that would be playing and they would almost never play. You know, one of them would maybe like the game, but then when they played in a group, they almost never played in the spirit of the game. It was always like they kind of just played to, like, you know, be silly and troll other people. And so they would have, you know, they would be in a group, they would get in the same table and they would get on opposite sides. And if you're in that situation, you know, the spirit of the game is that you don't share any information that the opposite side is not supposed to know. But of course, they would just like openly share information and then decide, like, you know, like, let's do something that makes no sense. Let's start, you know, like, okay, I'm on the good people's side, but you're on the bad people's side, and we want the bad people to win today. So I'm going to be this good person that always votes like counter to my interests and tries to convince other good people that, like, you know, this is the right thing to do, just to see, like, you know, to me, I just thought, like, you know, this is kind of immature playing of this. So I don't know where Witch of Salem falls in or where that sort of experience happens, but like, just, you mentioned social deduction, and I know that's what that game is kind of about. So how do you deduce much from a, you know, group of people where they are playing both sides of the coin and are really playing it more than anything to try to get a rise out of you?
Yeah, those are those issues as well. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of the game that did it, but yeah, I don't know. I think games that require a lot of like talking with each other, like that, just, I guess I don't see how they work on digital formats that well.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't know how people did like online poker so long, and I guess I never got into that, but you know, it's neither here nor there, because we also mentioned like Through the Ages, and that has like sort of a, you know, it has a lighter diplomacy aspect to it.
Online poker clicked because people were betting money on it.
Yeah.
So like just
that was part of, that was a big part of the deal, was the money.
Yeah, there would be no tells, or because you couldn't really tell anybody tells or anything on that. But
Yeah.
What I think is funny though, like for poker, like if I watch I don't really watch it for fun because I'm not that interested in it, but like I'll see, at sports bars or something when they're doing like the World Poker Championships, and like the people that are doing it are like in a way to me almost trying to become as digital as possible.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna wear sunglasses and a hoodie, and like I'm like, you know what? Like I would, if we want to make the disallow all, no headphones, no sunglasses, no, you look at your freaking opponent in the eyes. That'd make it interesting. But yeah, no, I just saw it when people were doing that, and I thought that was kind of hilarious. I'm like, no, this would be more interesting if you actually had to interact with people while playing poker.
Yeah, for sure. Isn't that what it's about?
Yeah.
So to take it from, because we've been talking about Civ games, I think that one aspect of Civ games, is war and war games. Are they best suited for like a tabletop setting where it's turn based, or is it best suited for a video game setting? And what do you guys have to think? What are your thoughts?
I'm gonna go with, I think it kind of depends a lot on the type of war game you're talking about. If you are talking straight quote unquote average hex encounter games, I think you can totally digital that and be done with it.
You mean like make a digital version, or do you think that like a video game, like in a video game that would run opposite it? Like, I mean, say there's a video game called Company of Heroes,
right?
That and there's other probably video games that have handled the same sort of managing a squad, and
Right.
It's hugely about cover and like
I mean that's
your units and flanking.
It essentially is. Really, at that point, I mean, even then, essentially, it is doing a hex encounter war game, but because the video game has enough computing power, you can take all the hexes off of it, and it'll calculate all the terrain effects for you, right?
Yeah, and those terrain effects are not tied to a hex system. Like the hexes, are just like.
But the hexes, yeah. But the hexes, I mean, the hexes are there in the hex encounter war game just to give a reference point like that, so that you can actually figure out what you need to figure out. But, if I think of games like, I played for a while, Jagged Alliance, which is basically XCOM, the, United States military game. Like that essentially more or less could have been a hex encounter game, other than there were no hexes because the computer didn't need those to tell you what you needed to know. I think, those kind of systems you can do as a video game, either straight digital copy of it, or I know there's a lot of like lower cost video games that are essentially they're hex encounter digital war games. Like they're designed just like an analog game would be. They just never made an analog version of it. So I think anything like that you can easily put in there, especially since a lot of sort of the old hex encounter war games involved you moving everything for your side and then the next person moving everything for their side. So you could play monster war games, asynchronously on this, and probably find it, kind of like Through the Ages on digital eliminates the god awful downtime problem if you're going to play 4 players. Whereas this would eliminate that. Okay, I moved all my units. I'm going to watch TV for a couple hours, then I'll be back, while you do your moves. But if the war games start becoming like some of the more modern style war games that I've experienced, where there's interrupts or there's you make a move, do I choose to make a reaction move to that? I think those can still be done in a digital format, but I think it would be harder to do that as a multiplayer asynchronous kind of thing unless we were all playing together, because then it becomes kind of the same problem digital games have with auction mechanics, where it's, I have to now wait for you to make a decision. But
yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's I think if a war game is looking to sort of bend its genre and go in a different direction, I think that, of course, like, digital is maybe not going to be the best setting for that. And if it has like interaction, like negotiation as a part of it, if it has like, supply lines maybe as well, could be something that's could be better done in an analog setting. If you're trying to fight a war as well as trying to, maintain your supply lines and stuff, and there's like sort of an element of logistics to it. But who knows? Like that, some maybe it just hasn't been done in a way that I've seen. So
yeah, what thoughts do you have on that, Trent? 'Cause I know you've played a lot of war games too.
I think it depends again on what you're looking for out of a war game. I think Andy hit it very well earlier on. If a war game to you is like the hex encounter, moving units around on the map, a computer handles all the details of that much more smoothly than a paper map does. And I think the only reason the people that continue to use paper maps is they like the tactile feel of the pieces. That's really the only thing it has going for it. It's a lot of math that can just be done on a computer. But and I think this is true for all types of games. The more you get into the human interaction part of it, the more you get into diplomacy, the more you get into the things that are more interesting in a face-to-face interaction on a table, then the table games work better. So, like, I'm going to give you an example of a coin game works much better face-to-face than it would ever work on a computer. I think, for example, I think of a time where the three of us played Cuba Libre. That was an experience that relied a lot on human interactions.
Yeah.
And it would have lost so much if we were trying to play that on a computer. It was a way better experience face-to-face, and it was because of the human interaction elements. It was the trying to play off of each other and talk each other into moves and things like that. It's very, very difficult to get that in a computer thing. The only way you can do something like that is if you're like all in a voice chat, and even then you lose a lot of like the face-to-face inflections and things like that.
Yeah, anytime you kind of take a degree away from the human element, you kind of lose something on that, I think.
This is kind of why I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really have a strong positive feeling toward board games that are just multiplayer solitaire, because in that situation I'd rather just be playing a computer game because it does it better. I'm not interacting with the people I'm sitting there with, so why not play a computer game that can do that kind of game much better with a lot more detail and a lot more decision space for me. That's kind of how I feel about multiplayer solitaire games.
Yeah, and I think one thing, just to be clear, so I'm not ragging on computers, because I'm not. I think another advantage of making it into a digital format is the more complex your rule system is, the better the computer's going to be to handle that.
Yes, 100% agree.
Like I've been saying for years that, dear God, Mage Knight needs a digital app. Like playing that game with one or two, solitaire or asynchronously with two, that would be awesome. Because like the rule set to that game is one of the biggest barriers to entry to it, is all the different things that go with it. Or some of your Monster War games, like the way the computer can just keep you from making a mistake in the rules, would be nice. That would eliminate Joe's issue of he oopsed a rule procedure in turn 3 and it's turn 9, and now he's mad at the game and doesn't want to finish.
Well, that's why I need to play with somebody like you, Andy, who's like just tells me like, it's fine, whatever, dude, just keep going with it, because like the voice in the back of my head won't let me go with it. All right, so train games are your forte, Andy, and I just like to say that since I of course am not an expert, I'll speak first. And I just want to say I started when I was very young, just learning how to use computers. There's a game I encountered, I think I might have mentioned on the podcast before, called Lionel Train Town. And it was just a fantastic, sprawling game that was all about, like, there was not just logistical puzzles that were all about trying to, like move around freight and get the freight in the right spot, but there was also like a lot of track laying that was a part of it. And they really like they went as far as like having one. I remember there was one mission in the expert scenario where you were like only controlling a hand cart, and you had to like find your way out of this like area that was all fog. Like you just started with only view, like you had gotten lost in the fog, and it was like a very like there was no other game. It was in these other 60 different levels or so that there were in this single player experience. There was also like, of course, like an open play version. I thought they really explored a lot of like track laying and like delivery and stuff like that, but doing so from a like basically playing with trains aspect, playing with little model trains. I love Lionel Traintown. I also did play Railroad Tycoon, and isn't it interesting that Railroad Tycoon is it has a board game version that essentially made its way into what's currently, I think, Railways of the World, which is like the sort of baby version of Age of Steam, right? Am I?
Yeah, Railways of the World's basically a lighter, friendlier Age of Steam.
And Railways of the World is just a reskin of a Railroad Tycoon board game.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, sadly, Murr was prompting me to talk about train games, and like I really weirdly enough, I have not played very many digital train games. Like I've got a couple that I haven't played, but now
I got really obsessed with Railroad Tycoon 2 back in the day. I played that a ton. I mean a ton for a while, but like you can't even find it anymore. So
you can on good old games. Like I got Railroad Tycoon 2 off, or not 2. I have Railroad Tycoon 3 on my computer.
Yeah, 3's not a good. 2 was amazing. I played 3 and I was disappointed.
And then I have like that Railroad Empire. That's a new one that came out. Correct me if I'm wrong on those, Trent, because this is one where you actually have more knowledge than me. The computer games, were they much more of logistics style games? Like there wasn't any shares of stock or anything in them, was there?
No. It was a lot like, honestly, Railroad Tycoon 2 reminds me a ton of playing Age of Steam.
Yeah.
A lot like Age of Steam.
It's like SimCity meets Age of Steam almost. I think, because you do a lot of like sitting there watching and waiting for like, a train to get to
way
a
across
place.
the map, yeah.
And it's like, oh, I've got $50 now. I can start building track again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's what I say. There, like, I don't know of any video games that have simulated like an 18xx style.
Well, other than literally 1830, the computer game.
Yeah, but that's not quite the same thing, right?
Yeah, we're talking a digital version, yeah.
Like the only economic game I know of that's on computer, it's another one I downloaded in a Steam sale and still have not really played at all. Oh God, now I can't remember the name of it. The one that's like, it's basically an economic warfare game. Oh God, I'm drawing a blank on it now. Oh, wait, I have my computer up.
Oh. Well, while you're looking that up, I would say, just we're getting here to where, I mean, we've done some good discussion about it, and I certainly feel like we could go on. I'm unfortunately gonna, this is gonna have to be a bit of a shorter episode of Good Board Ugly for my sake, with the commitments I have coming up tomorrow and Saturday with tennis.
We talked about it a good amount anyway.
I mean, there are unturned stones here, in terms of there's a lot of games that have existed in the digital space first, but are really more analog games, like Hearthstone. I consider Into the Breach like very much, like something turn based, and there's reasons I think that. And Slay the Spire, which just came out, which I'm very much looking forward to, though I don't have any like real experience with it.
I'm going to refer to a computer game here that Factorio feels like a board game to me, but it feels like a board game that would take up like a city block if you were to actually physically play the game. And like, so, I mean, it's a game that basically is a board game that can't really function in the real world. I think that you could make a Factorio board game, but like I said, you literally need a city block. And if you condensed it down to something that would fit on a table, either the pieces would be like Tokyo Highway sized, microscopic, or else it would not be. It would lose a lot of the charm of what is Factorio.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, like basically, didn't you say that Factorio is the game that killed roads and boats for you?
Yes, it is the logistics game, period. I've never played anything like it. I have a friend of mine named Jake that I don't think he should ever play Factorio because he'd probably lose his job, his career, and his life.
Well,
anyway.
Did you find it, Andy?
Last thing. The game was Off-World Trading Company.
Oh, I played that. That's good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it's
Trent played everything.
Yeah.
It's like Off-World Trading Company is like almost like a Civ War game where you have to like buy out your competition instead of destroy them.
Joe, I was playing games like this when you weren't even a twinkle in your parents' eye yet.
Well, when I was just like learning how to like
Joe was
use a computer and
when you were learning how to use the toilet.
Yeah. Joe was mastering the speak and say, and Trent was playing like war games at that point.
I learned how to play Acquire at age 8, and that was in 1986. Yeah. So I don't know, like, yeah, I was playing.
Now, when you were playing some of these games, it would have been probably close to the same time. If you were in your high school years, I would have been playing like that Lionel Traintown. And from what you've described it, I don't know, like I've seen what the way the game looks like in a screenshot, and it does kind of remind me of a lot of what I enjoyed from Lionel Traintown. And I grew with that game, man. I grew from like a 6-year-old that could only play the easiest, like make one train go here, to like early teen where I was like, yeah, I mean, like I'd say that like developed a lot of cognitive ability throughout Lionel Traintown.
Oh yeah,
yeah. All right, well, that's we can do like I want to revisit this topic. I think this could turn into like a part 1, and we could get TC on here to tell us how wrong we were about when we just were like, oh yeah, those war games, you could just do them online. Yeah. But anyway, now moving into the hype, let's go ahead and start with you, Trent, because you had a couple that you were going to throw out there. I don't know if you've decided to talk about both, but I mean, by all means.
I think I'm just going to talk about one of them. I think that we had a pregame discussion. I think I'll just stick with one of them. I want to talk about Brides and Bribes, which was a Kickstarter game a few years ago that I was aware of, but it didn't really like. It was the language of the Kickstarter made it clear that there wasn't it didn't feel like there was a whole lot of effort into a good English translation of the game, and there were a few other like things that didn't really jump out at me. And so I kind of let it go. And the first edition came out to backers in 2017 or 2018. I'm not sure when it ever came out to backers. But it came out in stores not too long ago. And I didn't get to play it, but I witnessed some people playing much of a game of it. And it seemed really fascinating. It had it's a worker placement game where you only have 3 workers. But the interesting part was your workers basically effectively came with a bid. So when you put your workers down, you basically put a bid underneath them. And then later on, those bids would be revealed, and they would have a huge impact on what your workers were able to do and whether they were able to fend off competition in those spaces. And some of the effort you would put into the game is getting good workers essentially for better bids later was what some of the spots would do. Other ones would let you build buildings to make your little like duchy or portion of the town better. I think it was a portion of the town better. It felt, and honestly reminded me weirdly of like, imagine if Agricola allowed you to put workers in the same place, but you had bidding tiles to put underneath them. And then the bidding reminds
me of Brussels. Yeah,
it's a little like Brussels 1893, which is another game I really like. That's a good point. It did kind of remind me of that. And I was very fascinated. So I've been I'm hunting around trying to find a low-cost copy of it because that's something I do with my fun time is to look for cheap copies of games. But it looked really interesting to me, much more so than I got the feeling out of the Kickstarter. I didn't get to follow all the rules of what was going on, but that's what I picked up, and that type of thing is... I like games that feel very confrontational. I like bidding mechanisms that are interesting. And it felt like a lot of that was going on in this. The Brides and Bribes name came from the fact that this takes place in a period where arranged marriages were very important in terms of getting influence in a community. So you were bribing people and trying to marry into families to get better reputations, hence the name of the game. And it looks really cool, and I look forward to playing it. I hope to find a cheap copy soon, and if I do, I will definitely be bringing it to game night.
Nice.
Sounds interesting to me, and I'd love to check it out. I will go ahead and jump up here with mine. I think I might have referred to it, but I didn't do a full hype section in the past. This game is called Critical Core, and it's really more of an RPG system. So what do you know? You have me hyping an RPG system. This is being marketed, and it was run on Kickstarter. That was just successful and just finished. It is being marketed as a tool for people that to help people on the autism spectrum learn basic social skills. In the context, in the context of yes, well, basically us. In the context of a fantasy role playing game. So, what it pretty much includes is it's kind of like it's based on the D&D like 5th edition open world, like I think SRD is what it says or something like that. And what it pretty much does though is they, with the help of experts, teachers, therapists, and like professors, I forget what else, like basically anybody who would know about autism, they got them together to try to turn essentially, like a social skills class that you might see in a special ed setting, or in a specific spectrum setting, and try to turn that into a game where it will teach these kids the same thing, teach individuals with autism the same sort of ideas, but do it through the systems of like D&D. So I'm excited for this because it is something that it's also billed as being a great introduction to role-playing games in general. And so, like it could be a place for me to try out my DMing skills, which at this point are definitely, I have 0 skill points in that stat right now. So
that's all right. Don't worry about it. I did role playing games for years, and I still have 0 skill points in that.
They unlock quite a few extra like character classes. They started with only 4, but they had some stretch goals, and they added like 4, 6. I think they added 4 extra. Yeah, and some extra stuff too, like extra modules and nice. And anyway, it looks kind of to me like a pretty basic pack for for an intro RPG, but then also having that added, like with my wife teaching level 2 and 3 special ed, having maybe there being a potential of doing this with my high school gamers club and doing it where I have some of my gamers that I work with, that enjoy it, maybe inviting in some kids to try to make it a sort of outreach thing that we do with, some individuals that way. So I'm very excited for it. I think it's really a cool thing to see. It funded very, very well, and that's called Critical Core, if you'd like to find it on Kickstarter. Andy,
yes,
let us know now about a war game.
Yeah, kind of. It's a GMT P500, and this should be less controversial than my last type of a P500. But anyway,
last one was a real struggle, Andy.
Yeah,
it was a scramble, perhaps.
Yeah, we were scrambling for ways out of that discussion.
To be fair, I hyped that before some things were found out. Anyway, this one is actually by the same designers as Time of Crisis.
Oh yeah, I'm all over this.
Oh yeah, but this game is called I'll probably mispronounce this horribly. Barracks or Barracks.
Barracks, dude.
Emperors. This just came out for P500 just this last week, I think. But it's set in the same rough time setting as Time of Crisis, that kind of time in Rome when like everything was going down the crapper. And so this game, though, is a little more micro in scale than Time of Crisis. It's set during specifically a time within that sort of 3rd century where at one point there was like 45 people claiming the throne of being emperor. So that's kind of the thematic connection to this. But what the game is, as Bill's is it's a trick-taking game.
Trick-taking game! Whoa!
But here's the shtick. All the tricks start on the board visible. Yeah. And you play cards like between the tricks. So the card you play to try to win one trick might influence how the other trick gets resolved on the other side. Which sounds really interesting. So yeah, think of it as a trick-taking game where all the tricks are completely visible and up for grabs right at the beginning, and you have to still play the same hand of cards you have. So it's like, oh, I want to win that trick, but then that's going to cause this horrible thing to happen on the trick right beside it. Oh God, what's the decision? But it's supposed to have some similar elements maybe to Time of Crisis and some familiar cards and how they work. It just sounds really unique. Like I've never seen a trick-taking game with that. And it's supposed to be like family to lightweight. So like a simpler game than Time of Crisis as well. So one that you could play with your family or kids that would just, basically what they're billing this as is, if you think about what Battle Line did for 3-card poker, this game aims to do for like spades and bridge.
Yep.
And that was an instant.
This sounds great, dude.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
totally.
insta-backed this as well. This looked amazing.
Yeah. So that's the Barracks Emperors, and go check it out on GMT. While it has your typical war game title, this is not your typical war game. It's definitely a different beast, and I'm really hoping this one climbs to its 500 needed quick.
I think it certainly will.
It sounds fascinating. And it's a Roman theme, so safe.
Yay.
All right, that's my hype.
Nice safe ending to the show there, Andy.
So, go
fall over the finish line.
Go P500, everyone who listens, so that I can get my copy sooner.
Yep.
Yeah.
But don't scramble for them, please.
Yeah, don't scramble.
No, make an orderly line.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's what we got for you on this show. Yeah. Thanks, guys. That's what we got for you on this show. Thank you for listening and taking in this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. Have a great week of gaming, and catch us next week here on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.